night.
Thank you all.
A very warm, friendly audience tonight. I love it. And your hometown audience.
Yes.
Uh,
And a
well,
beautiful audience. We must say that.
well, Willie, thanks so much. This feels kind of it's just meant to be because Willie was a very important educator in my brother's life, who I think he's here somewhere. There he is back there. Jackson. What?
Is it fair to say that if he didn't learn anything? I still think it's fair to say it.
But truly, I mean, he credits you as being the reason, he always says, Willie Carver is the reason I got through high school. So I'm excited to be here with you. Never thought I'd be sitting next to you and as an author now, not just an educator. But you just won an award. Which award is that?
Book Riot named me 2023 Book of the Year. Which Kendra Winchester, who works for Read Appalachia, sort of hinted that this might be a possibility a few weeks ago. And I was saying to the press, like, so what does that mean? Like, it's a possibility? And they were like, she wouldn't say it if it wasn't real. I'm like, well, I mean, maybe. But anyway, still can't believe it. Very excited.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so to start us off tonight, and we're going to talk about your book a lot, but take us back. I always like to start with, take us back in the Willie Carver time machine. And, you write about so many beautiful, entangled web of your identity and the pieces that make you who you are. And so take us back in the time machine to childhood, Willie, and what that meant, your upbringing, what it means to you today as a writer, as an educator, as an advocate, as an activist. What did that upbringing mean to you?
One of the best things about being a teacher, and I think any teacher here can attest to this, is that your kids make you way smarter. They ask questions in class that you have to think about, and they're sort of the external processing of your brain, right? I was at an event in Dayton, Kentucky, and there was a woman there from Appalachia, and she said, "How did you write about Appalachia without making me mad?" Because it's easy for me to get mad, even at well-meaning people. And I had no answer, like most teachers, the first time they sort of hear a question like that. But I started thinking about how, when I wrote, I thought, I know how much I love this place. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to try to whitewash it. I'm not going to try to change what it is. I'm not going to try to think about what other people expect from me or what I expect from them. I'm just going to love the place that I'm from. And how could I not? I'm from Floyd County in Eastern Kentucky. I have an extended, very big family. I have 150 first cousins. Both of my parents had 12 or 13 siblings, depending upon how you count and who you count. Y'all know how that goes. And everybody took care of everybody. I always say, if you want to believe that love exists, visit Appalachia at Christmas. There's no kid that doesn't have a toy. There's no one who isn't watched out for if someone can find them. But and I've come from hardworking people, but I also come from people who live in this society where hard work's not always enough to make it. And so school was what lit me on fire, what made me feel like I could do anything. Sometimes on just a real base level, school had running water. We didn't always have running water. School had food. We didn't always have food. School had electricity and heat. We didn't always have electricity and heat. But school also had people who looked at me and saw something that I wasn't yet and believed that I could become that. So it's a transformative power that really is magic. We don't think about the magic of that. That 24 little kids walk into a room and a person stands in front of them and says, "You're going to be something different when you walk out today." And then they cast their little spell, and then every one of us leaves different from when we came in, every single day, over and over. So yeah, I was a nerd, is the short answer.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And when I was reading your book, I connect on so many levels, growing up as a gay kid in Eastern Kentucky. And I don't think that you have to be a cisgender male gay from Eastern Kentucky to connect to these stories. because there are so many things, and we're going to touch on a lot of those elements here tonight. And the first one that really stood out to me, and I love to eat, so the food. There's so many beautiful, just the way that you describe the food. You can like taste the biscuits, you can taste the grease, you can, the butter, and so that's a huge connection to our culture. It's a connection to place, but also identity, and you kind of weave that in with your identity. And I'd love for you to start us off, if you wouldn't mind, to read Biscuit Girl.
Sure. Biscuit Girl.
We've got some fans. Okay.
So, I'm particularly bad at tables of contents with my ADHD here, so I will always take longer than it should take to find these pages. But yeah, Biscuit Girl. I'll just start by reading. Making biscuits is for girls. Well, you sure as heck could have fooled me. Before I even learned to sing the alphabet, I could make flour, milk, butter, or grease, sing, hum, chant, rhyme, and even shout if I had baking powder. Butter transforms everything into love between your teeth and your tongue. It's the kind of love that keeps sending you straight home after work. Shortening drifts with you through the atmosphere. When you get too high up, you can't smell the weekend fat of home. I can make biscuits drop like fat, dumpy stalactites willingly jumping to their deaths from an ambivalent spatula. And I can roll out multiple choice standardized biscuits that stand waiting for further instructions. And I can command them to rise from a sea of butter until their crusts harden like carbohydrate continents in a casserole Pangea. Why, I can even spoon them and plunge them into soups, one right after the other, so flawlessly and effortlessly that someone might call one a dumpling. As teenagers who worked at McDonald's, we were sometimes assigned shifts during breakfast on the weekends. They said I couldn't be the biscuit girl, because, well, I wasn't a girl. But that didn't stop me from carefully observing the process, or from taking over one day when Rachel called in sick. I was biscuit girl every weekend after that. Thank y'all.
I love that, and that's just one of the. I had a really hard time picking one poem from the food category, because you have a lot of really beautiful things about food, and sometimes the scarcity of food. And we're going to talk a little bit more about poverty, and how that comes across with parents, at least, as sacrifice and love and care. So to talk a little bit about your upbringing, you weave in another really important element, which is faith, and a very complicated subject in your book. So talk to me a little bit, and then I would love for you to read Waiting for God, but how faith plays into your worldview then and now, and maybe it's different, but how that impacted how you see the world.
I think like any human being raised up in an organized religion, but more so as a queer person, faith is complicated. Faith is complicated because there's really two other people. You're in this triangle dance with God and with other people. And I think as a queer person, I walked through a lot of fires with God and realized that those fires were lit by people. And for the longest time, that made me not want to walk with anyone at all. And I think it's hard to deny. I mean, look at these beautiful human beings who showed up tonight. It is hard to deny God when you see so much love in the world. Love that doesn't have to be. It's an active choice. We all could have been watching television, right? Sometimes it is often the more difficult choice. So I can't deny love. And then in that same token, then I can't deny other people. So that for me has been the long dance with God and people and religion. I was fortunate. Brandon Gilvin, I'm sure a lot of y'all have to know him. I didn't know who he was other than someone I interacted with online, but he said, I would love to have you preach a sermon at my church. And I was like, what in the world is that? No. But I took it seriously and said, okay, let me think about this before I say yes, because I took it seriously. And that was such a beautiful moment of healing that also connect to Mount Sterling, connect to people. Because I think my biggest fear at this stage of my life has always been other people, to trust them with God. But I realize that's sort of that's the homework, right?
Yeah.
We got to trust other people with everything. We can't do this alone.
Yeah. Well, would you mind to read Waiting for God for us?
Absolutely.
And I had a hard time finding the poem for faith because you have so many really moving passages on that.
Thank you. So this one takes place fourth grade-ish with my mom. We lived in a housing project, Warco, in Floyd County. And the funny thing about that is I remember thinking it was so fancy. Like, we're going to live in a house with brick on the outside and 2 bathrooms and lots of bedrooms, and there's a park and sidewalks. I just want to throw that out there. Housing projects are fancy. Waiting for God. I was excited and nervous to be baptized because I thought it would make me brand new, like a toy still tied up and glued to its packaging, and also keep me from going to hell. In the 3 days until my baptism, I still had 5th grade homework. And on a cool Thursday evening, salted thick with dogwood and spring air, my mom joined me. We stretched out on the tired hood of her car under the Gregorian hum of a crackling housing project parking lot streetlight so that I could color in the phases of the moon with a pencil. She brought out a blanket and even let me sip some weak black coffee. Do you think God will wait until Sunday for the end of the world? What if he came tonight and I went to hell? She brought the cover around my shoulders, and her frayed and overworked arms anointed that bargain bin blanket with the power to embrace me. She gestured upwards. The same God that put them stars in the sky didn't do it so he could send you to hell. He holds them up for a reason. He'll wait on you. The dark sky became an aquarium of sparks and love, and every fish had a name. Those 3 days stretched into 3 decades. Despite the baptism, preachers and lawmakers and winners and losers and lovers and haters and neighbors with tongues and arms hot like red irons would over and over again hold my head underwater, hoping that the metal hiss of steam would mock me as I drowned. But with each plunge under, the darkness of the water would part, and fish made out of stardust would lay hands on me and dance in the spirit. Thank you.
That just, it's so vivid, right? The mind of a child who's been told, if you're not saved, you're going to hell, and those 3 days. So walk me through the process of when you write a poem like this. I mean, what was your inspiration for this poem? Obviously your childhood, but there's a lot of metaphor in there too,
So I had no intention of writing a book. I actually sat down to write an angry email and wrote the first poem, and sort of sat looking at it going, what is that? Where did that come from? And I think there was a kid in me, a young kid, who was silent for years so that I could be here, who did the work so that I could survive. And some of that work was done in churches, and some of that work was done in schools, and some of that work was done in scary hallways and bathrooms at schools. But he really had something to say, and my instinct was let him say it. So 2 things. Just in terms of process, I basically do this when I'm writing because I like to feel what it feels like. So I really try to feel the moment. And so when I'm really trying to think of like what is the word I'm looking for, I have this physical sensation of like lots of things coming at me and trapping me and trying to pull me back. And so like I need to do this to get the word like net. Oh, something was netting me. And then on another level, it was letting that kid talk. I can't stress this enough. I feel like this was written by a kid and not me, and or a kid who is me. But there were a couple of moments when he would write a line, and I would be like, "Oh boy, that is a sentimental line. That is a big line to say." And once I put my hand over the backspace button, and I could hear him in my head, and he said, "Don't erase me. Everyone erased me." So I didn't erase him, and I let him talk. I let him speak exactly as he wanted to. So I think when we go through life, when we have this artificial sensation that we're something different from what we used to be, because of how the passage of time works with humans, but we're not that different from who we were at 3 and who we were at 7 and who we were at 12. They're still there with us. So for me, the process was really not getting in the way of whoever, whatever had lived that moment, and then letting them talk.
That's beautiful. I love that, and actually reminds me of something. I went to a conference a couple weeks ago, and somebody was saying, also a writer, and she was saying, for her, it's like there's also a kid inside herself as a child, and she said, everything I do, I'm doing to make the child me proud. I'm trying to live up to the expectations of me as a child, or I'm trying to be the hero for myself as a child. So I think we all connect to that in some ways, right? Everything that we do is somehow connected to exactly what you're saying,
Toni Morrison, I read last fall, describes this as a flood. She's like, you can take the water, it's already got its track, it knows where it's supposed to run. And we can do whatever we want to try to change its flow and move it around, but at the end of the day, when the flood comes, it's going to go right back where it wants to be. So she said, we have these floods back to where those waters were. And sensitive people, like, I literally feel it first on my skin when those things happen. But I think we all have those floods back to the first moment.
Well, this is a perfect transition to what I wanted to talk about next, which is representation, and particularly for LGBTQ people, but many different minorities, and I think so. And this is going to kind of center around Clubhouse character because I think it's the perfect poem for that conversation. But at first, I wonder what your take is on representation in media. I think so often we want to normalize LGBTQ characters so that that we don't have to. Why do you need to flaunt that? Why do you need to tell me who you love and what you? I don't care. You're a person. But why is that representation important in media or in entertainment or in literature even? Why is that important to highlight, in your opinion?
That particular motif, I think, is important, not just in that it's wrong when people say, oh, why do you want to flaunt who you sleep with when we talk about queer representation? But I think it's really about the story of who you are and who gets to tell that story, right? So I'm no more sexual than anyone else. Most days, if I get my dishes washed by the end of the night, I feel good about myself, and I'm done for the evening. So like, when I hear people who associate me being married to a man or being gay with sexuality, what I really know is when you see me, you think of sex. When you see me, you don't see me as a fully formed human yet. You see me just from that lens. And that's why and I think often that happens because we don't have those stories. Because that person has been controlling the story from day one about who I am and what I am, about who any sort of queer person is. And I think that's true for all of us. When we're talking about Appalachia, it's the same motif, that someone has already decided who we are, what we are, and they lead with that story. And it's up to us to find ways to tell those stories in ways that change the narrative. I think it's particularly important for young people who aren't old enough to discern one person's story from what their possibility is in life. I didn't have a lot of stories. I had it's repeated over and over. Jerry Springer is an accidental motif in this book. But I mean, I can't stress how important Jerry Springer was, because it was the only time outside of church that I saw gay people. And they were ridiculed, but they were alive. And I thought, well, maybe I can be alive. Because that was the only way I could imagine it. I certainly didn't see people around me. Books are a powerful way for us to get to see a life, an in-depth life. And I can tell you, for all of the people who say kids don't read, go find the queer kids at the high school because they're reading. I was blessed my last year at the high school with a box of books that a group of students gave me. And they said, we basically have parents who won't let us be who we really are. So what we do is we buy these books and then we trade them. So there's an underground network of kids trading books. And they said, we feel safe and free enough that we don't need them. And so they gave me this box and said, will you give them to the kids who need them someday? Kids are reading books, and they're reading books to remind themselves that they can still be alive someday.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, would you please read for us Clubhouse Character?
I will absolutely read Clubhouse Character. A self-described gamer girl, who I don't know her, but she tweeted about this online, and was so ridiculously excited that I had to reach out and be like, okay, can I please send you a copy of this signed? Clubhouse Character. In one of the video games that I played as a kid, there was a character who hid in a clubhouse while the main character, a boy named Ness, saved the world. He only said 16 words in the entire game. And you could beat the game without even reading them. But if you found the hideout and you pressed A on the controller, the boy in a hat, who was built from 290 pixels, would say these words: "You're so cool. I think I really like you. Well, you know what I mean." I pressed A on the controller every day that I could, so that I could hear every sweet word said from one boy to another over and over again, in order to have a reason to save the world. It's odd to imagine that 290 pixels and 16 words could lift an actual child so far into the air.
And that one really spoke to me too, because I mean, I'm a little younger than you, but I grew up also in a time when there wasn't a ton of representation of LGBTQ people, so I didn't really see necessarily that as an option. So I would cling to anything that was remotely, the gay character, and it's supposed to be like the stupid sidekick, that. But you would cling to that because you're like, that's I see you, and you see me, and that's my only representation. And so I really love that. I want you to read for us. We're going to talk a little bit about voice and kind of going back to Eastern Kentucky a little. We're going back to the hills, and you're an English teacher, you're a French teacher, you obviously are teaching young people about grammar, but the power of ain't, right? The power of ain't, and I wonder if you read about Power of Ain't and then talk a little bit about how you embrace that voice, that vernacular, that dialect, and also in the same dichotomy, you're teaching kids, here's the correct way to speak English, right?
Mm-hmm.
but also be who you are. So read The Power of Ain't and then talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Power of ain't. A few teachers tried to tell me that ain't a word. But the truth will stand when the world's on fire. As everyone's aunt always says, with raised eyebrows and lowered opinions. But on the power of ain't, my papaw fought against men in suits and built unions out of coal dust and hungry babies when he said that he ain't doing what men in suits thought was all he was ever going to be worthy of doing. But on the power of ain't, my mamaw learned the mystical art of transforming nothing into good cooking, into messes of beans and taters with ham hocks that her grown sons would cry out for in prison cells, because there ain't nothing that craves beauty like wanting. But on the power of ain't, I set fire to everyone who said no, or even dared to get in my way. And I filled my hungry belly with their ashes. And I used the glow from their funeral pyres to light a path to college diplomas written in languages that I learned to talk better than them. Ain't nobody can tell me that ain't a word. Because the truth is they're afraid of it. It is a word of negation and power and taken back. A single pocket knife whittled stroke of breath that can hit you back with a switch it made you fetch from the tree. Turn you inside out until your justice is unjust, and straight up shake the table that your game is playing on. And there ain't nothing y'all fear like hearing the holy truth pouring out of the mouth of some dumb hillbilly.
I love it.
Thank you. So I think, like a lot of Appalachians, you kind of grow up with pride shame, because people constantly remind you to be proud because of how shameful everybody else is going to look at you. So it's this weird catch-22 where you're sort of programmed to see everybody else is looking down on you. Mm-hmm. And so you grow to imagine that everybody else is looking down on you, because often they are, while also having to sort of have this fire about you. And so for me, especially when learning French was great. Because one, I learned an entire new language and saw this beauty in it. But I also learned, grammar is a completely artificial construct. And a lot of the stuff that we do in Appalachian works perfectly in French. So I was able, one of my favorites is like ain't got no. So if you say that naturally, if you know the difference between I ain't got no pizza and I ain't got a pizza, those are very different sentences. Then you can understand the difference in French, je n'ai pas deux pizzas, je n'ai pas une pizza, which are very different sentences. And it thrilled me to no end that the countrier my kid was, the quicker they were able to catch on to the distinction. And I would just say, don't think about it, just say what feels right. And then the other kids would be like, wait, what? How's he doing that? And really what I'm saying is I know that there's role to it, there's complexity there, there's history there. It's a beautiful dialect. And one of the first things you learn in linguistics is that the difference between a dialect and a language is an army. When someone has enough power to say, this is how we talk. And what power does Appalachia have in the United States of America to make that sort of declaration, to insist on its own dignity? So I always understood there's no logical reason that one thing should be correct or another thing shouldn't. And there's beauty in the way my people talk. And then as far as teaching English, I always feel like I would teach the way you warn someone what the real world's going to be like. That was sort of the paradigm I would give kids. So I would be remiss if I didn't say, here's what is expected of how you should say it. Here is why people think you should say it this way. People who are going to make decisions about your future are going to make them because those people are ignorant. And you need to go change that world. But I also have to give you the tools to outsmart them, kind of like a Wile E. Coyote from Floyd County. So that's sort of my view on it.
I love it. And the word that stood out to me, what you were just saying, was complexity. And there's so much entangled in our identities for everybody, but especially for queer people in Appalachia. I wonder, with the complexity that we're talking about here, I wonder, you've been traveling around the country as the Kentucky Teacher of the Year. So that was a great year, and we were so proud that you were from right here in Mount Sterling. And I wonder what you heard from people when they hear this guy from Eastern Kentucky. I mean, what did they understand any of that complexity, or what was the conversation you had to have?
I was shocked at how much people would say, I have never thought about what you were talking about, which shows how important these conversations are, how important it is for us to talk about Appalachia, talk about queer Appalachia on top of that. I was really lucky to meet a person who works for Shutterstock. So you don't know, they're a company that basically does 90% of all the imagery that we find on the internet. That imagery is currently being fed into artificial intelligence that will determine our reality for the next 10 years. So I felt this compulsion, like, I need to get a hold of you. And I was like, hi, I have a problem with Shutterstock. And she was like, what? And I was like, so we got online and we looked up the word gay. And looked at all the images that popped up, and I was like, I see rich white people having brunch in cities. I said, there are definitely poor people of color having Coors Light in barns in McGoffin County, Kentucky. Like, where are their pictures? So it was really cool. We got to work together. We built a proposal. Shutterstock accepted it, so they're actually now traveling across the rural Southeast and getting pictures of queer people, LGBTQ people of color in rural places, so that those images are a bit more complex.
Yeah. Well, today is a very special day for you. It is your 15th wedding anniversary, is that correct?
So, I'm the bad husband who scheduled an event the night of his anniversary. My husband had to pay the fee to get to have the intimate experience at the beginning of this.
He sprung for the VIP.
He sure did.
Don't worry, Josh. We got some flowers around. You can. Well, it's a very special night, and we're so happy that you're spending your anniversary with us. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great? He's got a poem called Josh. And let's dedicate this to him tonight.
Absolutely. I met Josh in grad school when I was probably 25 and thought 24, 23, thought that I'm so bad with numbers, and thought that I was the oldest human being on earth, not to have already found someone, had already decided, well, I guess that's just not for me. I'll just be sowing my wild oats for the next 50 years and then put myself to pasture. How ridiculous we are. How ridiculous we are at all age. I love having those moments when I think about how foolish I was when I was younger, so that I can remind myself how foolish I am now. It's good to put some stuff into relativity. So this is called Josh, and it's the moment I met him. No hyperbole. Josh. The first time I saw my husband, he was wearing a purple polo shirt. Only then, he was just a smiling man who walked in to the first day of graduate school French wearing a purple shirt. My cells could already see beyond the cotton threads and shuffling syllabi a beginning that would set the stars into perpetual motion. And I dissolved myself into electrons and protons and shifted the fault lines of a solid universe to command him to sit directly in front of me. He did. I could feel the back of his head, hear the crashing wave of his hair against the precious peach column of his neck, could feel the infinite reaching in his shoulders and arms from worlds and centuries beyond his purple-collared shirt. And for the first time in a lifetime of words and movement and thought and light and darkness, I realized that I had never before known where I was. I knew then where I was. The brain is made of atoms, arranged in specific patterns, and composed by DNA laid out in the dried concrete of heartaches and love sickness and joys and fears in lonely teenage evenings comforted by the 2 a.m. glow of a television set, in Polaroid crunch proms and linoleum sheen school dances, and first kisses and crushes and boys and girls, and knowing that none of it was made for you. Yet somehow, here you are, existing. What is done can always be undone, and what is arranged can be rearranged. Sitting behind an unknown man on the first day of French class, a man who was and would be my husband, I felt the concrete soften into clay, felt the atoms cantillating in fluid harmony, felt the world break apart and burn and be remade and reborn in the span of a single Bible verse. In that moment, I learned that even the past has yet to be written, because a world and a time that had always been made for someone else, in the span of the time it took him to take a seat, were suddenly meant for me.
Nobody's crying. It's fine. Oh, that's so sweet. Well, Josh, we're so glad you're here. Happy anniversary.
Thank y'all for sharing it with us.
The best anniversary party. So let's talk a little bit about what you're up to now. I think you're wearing a full-on new hat, which is activist. And what an activist you are. I mean, it is so wonderful to have someone who fights so passionately for young people, for LGBTQ people right here in our community. You're on national news, and you're right here. You go like walk to the Arts Center, you know. So, where, in your opinion, I mean, everybody has how they feel about this, and I think I probably know your answer. But where do we stand with regard to youth safety, LGBTQ issues in schools and communities? Where do we stand, and where do we go from here?
The blunt answer is we are in a very bad place. Socially, we're in a very bad place geopolitically. I'm I'm a teacher who was raised on numbers. We look at the data over and over. We looked at the data. When I didn't want to, we looked at the data. But the data for LGBTQs is damning. It is damning, and we are responsible in all the ways that we can look at that word for these kids. A full 68% of LGBTQ youth considered suicide in the last 12 months. That's damning. 96% of LGBTQ youth say that them being thrust into the political sphere makes their lives worse. 70, I don't know the exact number, but upwards in the 70s, above 75% of LGBTQ youth describe themselves as consistently miserable. And just in case we have some cause and effect stuff, what's beautiful is how easily we can change those numbers if we try. A single affirming adult in the life of an LGBTQ kid reduces the likelihood of their suicidality by half. By half. It just takes one adult. And so when we look at the legislation that's being passed, the effect is that it's going to make it almost impossible for these kids to find a single affirming adult. And when we say affirming, we don't mean anything radical. We just mean someone who says, I'm glad you're here, exactly as you are. When those students are in communities that support them and have a single affirming adult, all of those numbers drop down to the same as their non-queer peers. So we know what we can do to make sure that these kids feel safe. They need to feel seen. They need to have someone who is happy that they're there. And they don't get that right now, often, in this country. So the work is all the more important. And I'm very lucky to be doing this work, frankly. I think one of the best lessons I had I kind of, for the first probably 10 years of my life, was just fighting people left and right about these things. And I had organized a letter against the anti-CRT legislation that was happening 2 legislative sessions ago. And because I was like, oh, I'm a teacher of the year, I can get all the other teachers of the year. So we had, I think, around 1,000 current and former teachers of the year who had signed this. And I had CBS that was wanting to talk. So the parent company of the teachers of the year said, we would like to talk to you. I'm like, oh boy, I'm in trouble. I knew it was going to happen. I've been teacher of the year for 20 minutes and they're already wanting to call me. So I take the call, and Sarah Brown Wessling, who's the spokesperson for CCSSO, says, we're just calling to make sure, what does your media kit look like? And I go, it's fine, we know what we're doing. And she goes, okay, well, do you have a media kit? Would you like us to look at it? And I go, no, I'm fine. So she tries 2 or 3 ways to breach the subject. And finally she goes, Willie, I am trying to help you. And she says it, and I go, my brain hears what you're saying, but my body doesn't. I don't think I've ever had anyone in a position of power to try to help me. So I got off the phone and I actually started crying. And I heard RuPaul, the drag queen, in my head say, the universe wants you to succeed. And I've heard him say this a million times, but I had never thought about what it meant. Not really, because it didn't seem logical. The universe is other people. It's not some necessarily, maybe it's a grand plan, but I can't access that. Other people want us to succeed. Think about the people in your life. You want them to succeed. If you thought you could do anything to make your friend feel confident or happy or loved or strong, you would do it, right? So I just went forth with this thought that if I stand at a door and say, hey, I want to walk through this, and I say it out loud, people will open it. And that has been my experience this year. Whether we're talking about Good Morning America or working with Campaign for a Shared Future, I just sort of say, hi, can we do this? And they always say yes, we'd love to.
Yeah. I'd really love for you, while we're on this topic, to read I'm Sorry, Chris. You have a lot of beautiful writing about what I call queer joy, being openly gay and being happy about it, and loving those moments of joy. But you also have some moments of regret or of darkness. And so I'd love for you to read this for us.
And before I'll even read, I'll say I want to thank Appalachia for teaching me how to laugh in the darkness. If there's anything good mountain people are good at, it's laughing when everything's on fire. So this was one of those moments of darkness, but I think even writing about it is a light in the darkness. So this is I'm Sorry, Chris. I was hiding in the counselor's office. Plastic green ferns were photosynthesizing fluorescent light bulb murmur and pointing at the unashamed brochures on self-esteem and pregnancy that kept the other students away. It was a space hidden by the refraction of an academic cement block mirage, tucked away for 9th grade sissies and boys who played Dungeons and Dragons who didn't know where else to go at lunch. One of them said that some boy had dropped a brick through the ceiling and onto your head, Chris, and that your angry queer blood cried out to the Lord in undulant bursts like the raging howl of engines passing under the wheels of a rolling coal train as the medical workers carried you out to the ambulance. I'm sorry, Chris, that your courage was just too big to fit in that country school, and that mine was too small even to say hello to you when you flitted by, like someone the ancient Greeks would have apostatized, your smile fuller than your fear, your lambent body on holy display, like a statue that you dared the unwashed to worship. I mean, you were the only boy in the history of the high school sent home because his shorts were too short. I'm sorry, Chris, that when I got the nerve to ask you out junior year of college, and we listened to Tori Amos bounce back off the bare shoulders of the hill, that I couldn't hear the exhausted wells drying out in your voice. Because even as you stood on the edge of a cliff, you made others want to live. I'm sorry, Chris, that whatever you consumed to soften your memories prevented you from ever making new ones. And I'm sorry that back when you were still alive and fighting for boys like me to live, I had only yet learned to hide. Thank you.
Willie, I've got to get through the hour. I've got to get through the hour. You can't do that to me. I'm choking on my water. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I wonder if you gave a call to action to everybody a minute ago. Sorry. No more sad poems. You gave us a call to action, but what advice do you have for those LGBTQ youth today who are hurting, who are in the midst of this moment? You've been there,
Yeah.
right? We've been there, and not everybody has necessarily been there on this issue. So what would you say to those kids who maybe don't feel like they have an ally or that one person?
Yeah, I like that you said there are people who haven't been there. I think sometimes it's the human condition. We don't see what other people see. We don't know what other people know. And sometimes I'll run across other people who I love, and we just experienced the same thing, and they somehow don't see what I just saw because my experience informs my ability to see it. And I think what's particularly difficult is those hardest moments for queer people are the invisible moments, the parts that they're not allowed to talk about, the parts that are now illegal to even talk about when kids are at their most vulnerable in school. And I think what's also really difficult about getting out of this moment is that the single most important stories that we need to hear need to come from people we can't possibly ask to take on one more burden. We can't possibly look at queer kids and say, tell us your traumatic experience. Tell us why you're in pain. Because it's such a big ask to have anyone do that, which is why I think it was so important for me. I'm big, I'm strong. I don't think there's anything anyone's going to say that hurts my feelings at this point in life. So I can share those things at this stage. So what I would say to any of them is let yourself feel sad. Let yourself feel angry. Let yourself feel grief. Our instinct in this society when we have emotions is to think there's something wrong with us or there's something wrong with them, right? But emotions are what makes us human. Emotions are what makes us who we are. And I think rather than run from them, look at them, feel them. My favorite, Eckhart Tolle, if anyone has read Eckhart Tolle, he's fantastic, life-changing. He suggests when you're experiencing an extreme emotion that feels like it's going to kill you, to stand above yourself and look at yourself experiencing the emotion. And you're no longer the person experiencing it. You're the person watching yourself experience it. And that little bit of critical distance allows you to feel. And it also reminds you that there's nothing wrong with emotion. Because the more we fight it, the more it's just going to come back at us in bigger forms. And mostly find somebody, anybody, even if it's a friend, make sure you're not alone. Because you're not alone. There's so many people who want to help you, who are going to be there for you, and who someday will make beautiful families and community with you.
I wish I had an ally. I wish I had an adult like you in my life as a kid, and I appreciate that. Thank you. So we've talked about all these complicated pieces that make us whole, and we're running out of time, unfortunately. So I think the poem for me that really kind of pieced it all together was the closing poem. The truth will stand when the world is on fire. And this is something that you repeatedly kind of allude to throughout the book. And it's a very powerful phrase in every use in different ways. So would you kind of bring us home and
Yeah.
close us out with that poem?
Absolutely. I will tell one story about your brother back there.
Uh-oh.
Not even directly involving you, but in one of the many complaints about me over the years, someone pointed to Jackson Campbell and said, "Well, Willie Carver is the one that made him gay." Now, I couldn't make this boy do homework, let alone. But what is particularly funny about it is, and I hope I can tell this about you, I'm going to anyway. You were so hostile at that moment in your life about all things related to church and religion. You were going through that fire, and I would repeatedly say to you, "Don't throw away everything yet. Let it be." And I'm thinking the irony there is I probably made you a pastor. There's the truth that'll stand. But thinking about adults. So if you're from Eastern Kentucky, you've heard this a lot, I'm sure. Truth will stand when the world's on fire. I feel like I heard it every 20 minutes when I was a kid over every single thing that was happening. So this was actually the original title of my book. And the press was right. This is a much more provocative title. But this is Truth will stand when the world's on fire. All of our Mamaw's comments about ordinary things could sometimes vibrate entire rooms in prophetic terms. "Mamaw, it looks like Jimmy's got that car working. You reckon he's going to try to get it all the way to that college in Moorhead?" "I don't know. Truth will stand when the world's on fire." It was as if they saw, from behind their black coffee, church window glasses, and giant print dresses, the end of it all and the connection to everything. How Jimmy's sunburn making it to fall semester might just be the stitch holding Adam to Moses to Jesus to the end of days. In the coal-black shadow mornings of the hills, such things were too ordinary and too sacred to question. Jimmy's car made it to college. So did mine. I was too busy teaching commas and essays to remember prophecy. Too busy not seeing the world in front of me to catch hold of the King James mountain witch woman stitches that held together the space-time, bending and breaking, and the universes between my students' words. Crawling out from under the graphite smeared on their multiple choice quizzes as they fought the brimstone cement bricks of the classroom for the right to melt down truth and freedom so we could finally see that they were the same damn thing. It was 6 years before I saw my first student's suicide note, hastily penned in high-pitched wet ink on the callous backside of an old bill of coal miner script. She was a bright, queer, rainbow-edged life squashed into 2 dimensions in black and white worksheet photocopies for 17 years. We saved her life, but her paper goodbye remained on my desk, distracting me as the trucks carried coal to refineries to convert it to gasoline, rumbling and fussing down the hill-carved roads that spied on the creeks, their black-lunged soot smothering the schoolhouse windows. I kept teaching commas and essays, and the space-time began to fall apart. The classroom began to wave and bend. Color seeped through the eroding walls and broke out in fistfights, and the universes demanding to exist in the spaces between the student sentences beat hard from inside the paper, surging across every threshold, until every ear, every eye, every proton spinning in its nucleus turned to look. The suicide notes and goodbye letters had by this point stacked themselves so high on my desk that their weight produced coal and then oil. And suddenly the old knowledge prophecy stitching wailed itself into view, rending the classroom into crackling pieces, tearing away the reality and exposing its frayed dimensions. The children rose up in a whirlwind as former things passed away, and they didn't ask what to do next because it has always been written. And the porch-swept voices of mountain women thundered across the sky like trumpets playing angel sheet music DNA. One by one, they would stand at the edge of my desk. Poor kids, gay kids, trans kids, mountain kids, hungry kids, abandoned kids, angry kids, seen kids. Real human beings existing as they should, as reality withered down in the quickly dissolving remains of their high school classroom. One by one, they would stand, with stories waiting to be written down. As they reached out their hands, As I rolled suicide notes and goodbye letters and tucked them, dried ink flying into the air like living shards of glass, into bottles half full of gasoline. We lit the notes, we threw the bottles, and then we let it burn. Hills blazed as smoke rushed dizzily towards the heavens. Cities cowered and fluttered as they turned to ashes. Governments were eaten alive. Fleeing schools turned to salt and shattered. Churches melted right into the creeks. The heat was hungry. The world was on fire. As the last brick fell apart at the impact of the final exploding bottle stuffed with gasoline-soaked goodbyes, the Waken Creek began to rise, spilling over on its banks. The clouds fever-sweating above the explosions below dropped from the firmament ample sheets of trying to pray the gay away, of bathroom politics, of crying onto handwritten letters, of self-righteous teachers and self-hating preachers, and thin cuts and dead words and broken skin and haunted bodies, and shame twisting through the sky and heavy tornado rivulets in their purest liquid form. The flood was almost instant. The creeks rose and sang hymns too old to be written down, as they called out to God from the ground, as they washed away the ruins of the world. The former things were passed away. We surveyed the world, made new, washed clean, burned pure, baptized in hope, though its fiery embers still cracked in our memories. And as mammals have foretold, since they first made biscuits and whispered stories in these hills, there we stood. Thank you all.
So, Gay Poems to Red States. We have them available outside, and Willie is going to sign a copy for you, so be sure to get your copy today. We have a few minutes for Q&A, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, do we have any questions? Yes.
Tell the story of the science teacher who inspired you.
The science teacher.
Yeah. So it's in here in poetic form. When I was in fourth grade, I thought I found a dinosaur skull. So I called my fourth grade teacher, whose real name was Donna Gray, because I knew how to use phone book, and said, "Oh my God, we got to do something. I've got to." She said, "Well, bring it in, bring the fossil in." So treated it so seriously, she let me clean it, polish it. We scored some paper, a tablecloth actually, so that we could show how wide it was, and then we took Polaroid pictures of it and sent it off to a professor at Moorhead, who then wrote me back and identified my fossil as a horse. But I remember how seriously she treated me. And I said, "Did you know all along that this was a horse?" And she said, "What I knew all along was you were a scientist." And the day I won Teacher of the Year, my first instinct was to call her and reach out the next day.
Wow.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I love that poem. It's great. Other questions?
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, second of all, as somebody who has lived in the classroom, what advice do you have for teachers who are still in the classroom and who are allies and are having a tough time supporting their LPs?
I will straight up cite the Commissioner of Education, Jason Glass, who recognizes the danger of this moment. And his first piece of advice is do not do the work of fascists for them. So often we're given sort of vague rules like don't teach anything racial and not told at all what that means. Teach whatever you want then. Force them to tell you what not to teach. If you get a vague warning like don't have anything controversial on the wall. Okay, well a pride flag isn't controversial. Make them tell you to take your flag down. Better make them take it down. That's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is just a statement of truth. You cannot follow this law in its strictest interpretation and follow the statement that you made when you became a teacher about what you would do for students. And the Commissioner of Education says, remember your professional ethics first, because they matter more than what men in Frankfurt tell you. So if men in Frankfurt tell you that you can't listen to a kid speak, or if men in Frankfurt tell you that you have to erase people, ignore the men in Frankfurt and do what's best. And maybe you have to accept the responsibilities of that, and that's tough. But someone said this to me, and it really just stands out as a very truthful statement. If you have a room with 49 decent people who are afraid to speak up and one Nazi, then you have a room with 50 Nazis. So we all have to remember our commitment to keep young people safe above all else.
Other questions?
Less Nazi-related questions are fine too, but. Yes, sir.
I feel like, nowadays, equal rights and just like people's identity, especially like people's identities that maybe aren't like commonly accepted, gets so wrapped up in like political discourse. As you were writing this book, did you ever fear that the message of some of your poems would get wrapped up in that political discourse? Like, did that ever slow you down, or did you just kind of lean into it? Tell us more about that process.
I think to some extent the title even sort of says like, I know what you're going, how people are going to respond to it. I think my goal was to kind of do it defiantly. So it means acknowledging what the sort of discourse is and existing in a world beside of it, but refusing to let it actually touch what I'm doing, if that makes any sense. And that's hard work, especially when, if you're writing about Appalachia, right? I think it's impossible for us to take away the lenses that other people have created when looking at us, kudzu and I don't know, biscuits and everyone loves everybody, or, all of those beautiful, nice things that we all want to imagine, or the opposite, the ugliness and only the bad things. And so I refuse to let myself fall into either one of those categories, and just said, I'm just going to write what was. And that's had some interesting consequences. Like some of the poems seem so sweet and nostalgic, yet they're like in this really bitter world. But, as a 6-year-old kid, I didn't know the global socioeconomics about why we didn't have food. I just knew that my mom could turn cornmeal and water into pancakes. I knew that she could do magic, and that's what mattered to me at that moment. So I think it's really hard to pull away those lenses, and probably I didn't do it perfectly. Kind of accepting that I wasn't going to do it perfectly helps too. I think that's true for any writer who's trying to put anything onto a pen. Someone else is already writing the words that you're writing down for you, and you've got to try to pull yourself away from their ideas.
Well, Willie Carver, thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Isn't it great? And oh, yes,
Well, I have to stand.
you get to
all.
sit.
Thank you all.
And everybody keep your seats because we have a big surprise. But before we unveil our surprise today, you've been wondering probably what this green thing is over here. So before we do that, I just want to let you know that this upcoming, not tomorrow, but next Saturday, July 29th, is the gala for the Arts Center, which we're really excited about. We have about 35 to 40 tickets left. So if you would like to come, it's going to be an amazing, amazing night. We have an aerialist, we have fire breathers, we have magicians, we have carnival games for adults only. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it helps us keep doing what we do here at the Arts Center. So we have a few tickets left. You can get those online, or before you leave, we can hook you up. And the other thing I would love to encourage you to do before you leave We received a grant from the Crystal Bridges Foundation, which is Walmart, the Walmart family, the Waltons, and they provided us with an iPad at the door where they are going to take all the data from surveys from people who visit today, and it actually gives us really good data on what we can do better, what we can improve, what you enjoyed, what you want to see more of. So before you leave tonight, there's an iPad at the door. There's also a QR code for you youngins, that know how to use a QR code, or anybody who does. And please take that survey. It's a 5-minute survey, and it helps us a lot. So we really appreciate you doing that before you leave. Okay, Willie, I made all my little announcements. Are you ready to give us a little background on our surprise here? So tell us a little bit what's about to happen.
So one of the last projects I had with some of my students at Montgomery County was and I had already mentioned, we're sharing these books amongst each other. And they were really concerned about the mental health of their classmates. And they were like, I said, well, let's do something, which is what I always do. I'm forcing the kids to do work. So they won a grant to purchase a lot of different things, among which was $4,000 in books with LGBTQ Black and brown characters. And we were not able to house those at the high school. So we've been trying to figure out how and where we will have those work. And
we have books.
The Gateway Regional Arts Center stepped in to help the kids. So you can take over from there.
Well, and we're so excited because we have our lending library already, and we have diverse books, and we're trying to get more diverse books because we have so many people who come in and take books and get to read those, and they're free in the community. And we believe in the freedom of information. So no banned books here. Actually, a lot of banned books here now. So Willie, let's go over and everybody, you can count us down. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. Woohoo!
So Coffee Tree Books in Moorhead was kind enough to give us 20% more buying power when we approached them about purchasing these books. Our students in Montgomery County have big hearts, just like the people who raised them. So one of the things that makes me most proud is that they also decided, they heard about a group in Owen County of LGBTQ students who are having a particularly hard time after one of their friends passed away by suicide. So they actually made the exact same donation to these kids in Owen County so that they could have these books as well. I'm also happy to say that we just started a GoFundMe only 24 hours ago, and we now have an additional $1,000 to purchase additional titles and make sure that students can get those.
Woo!
Very exciting. And WIMT just came today. Actually, GoFundMe itself, one of their executive communication staff actually reached out and they were like, we're really moved by this story. Can we send this out to some of our media partners? So there's going to be a lot of coverage to get even more books for students in our community and potentially even other communities. And WIMT ran a story at 6 p.m. tonight on this very GoFundMe. So we're probably going to see a lot more books for our kids in our community.
Well, thank you, Willie. This is amazing. So great. And this, when Willie came to me about this, I said, absolutely, all the arts for all the people, that's our mission, and it aligns perfectly with that because we want stories for all people, and for people to see themselves in our art, music, theater, dance, and literature, which is just as important of an art form as all the others. So thank you, Willie, and let's give him one more round of applause.
Thank y'all.